Hey guys, so in this video we're going to go over some updated crossbow builds and setups for Witchhunter. So we finally did port over the AUTOSHOCK setup using the Choir of the Storm from my monk setup over to the Witchhunter. And yeah, actually performing really good, and probably actually feels better than the previous versions like the Weapon Master Witchhunter, which was actually pretty strong on its own. But now even on my low budget setup that I was running before, pretty much exactly the same gear, but with the Choir of the Storm and a couple of passive tree changes, we're actually able to kill the T4 Xesht without any kind of like Hand of Wisdom in action or any of those expensive items, actually killing him off extremely fast for this kind of setup. And so if you're not really familiar with the AUTOSHOCK setup, I did make a video about it. You can go check out. It covers a bit more detail, but basically we're using the Choir of the Storm Amulet, which when we crit will proc this lightning bolt, and the lightning bolt is going to have a high chance to shock. And even on these lower DPS setups or the low budget setups, is actually applying shock very consistently, able to shock T4 Xesht and that kind of stuff. So ends up working out really good. And you might think like, oh, well, I don't really want to lose my amulet slot because that's where I'm getting a lot of damage or, you know, defense and that kind of stuff. But guys, this amulet is actually going to probably double your DPS, I would say, because, okay, maybe not DPS, but boss kill time. So most crossbow builds using shock burst rounds, they're going to have to go set up some kind of shock with a weapon swap or whatever, right? And while you're doing that, you're not actually doing DPS, right? So this actually does, first of all, reduces the boss kill time, like the overall time it takes to kill the boss, because there's no setup. You just go in, start blasting, and the boss dies. No setup required. So first of all, from a quality of life standpoint, there's like less buttons to press. Everything's automatic, and it just works really good. So that's first plus. And then also the amulet has a line that says critical hits ignore monster lightning resistance. And bosses are typically going to have some resistance, like 50 to 75. And that can severely lower your damage, and a lot of builds will get around it by doing a weapon swap to a curse and all that kind of stuff. But you know, that's kind of annoying to do. We don't want to push a lot of buttons, so this does fix that as well, so we don't have to worry about monster resistances. Pretty much we don't have to get penetration, we don't have to get exposure, and none of that is needed in the build. Okay, so that's why, like, this amulet, while it might seem like a DPS loss from losing a, you know, damage amulet with like attributes or projectile levels, it actually ends up being more damage, because also, since you don't have to weapon swap, you can fully charge up your fresh clip setup with no downtime, right? Because before, if you're using a weapon swap, like an old weapon swap setup, you would charge up your fresh clip, you swap to your weapon swap to apply a shock, and in that time your fresh clip stacks are falling off. But with this setup, they're up 100% of the time at maximum value, so you actually end up doing way more damage, like probably 50% more damage than a build that is not using this amulet setup. Okay, so in this video we're going to be covering the low budget version in more detail, and it's pretty similar to the low budget Weapon Master build I made, actually using the exact same items, except I had to buy a new chest, a new crossbow, and a new pair of boots. Aside from that, all the gear is the same, and I did make POBs for a medium and high budget and giga budget adorned setup as well, just for the lulz, and we can go cover those at the end of the video. Okay, so one other thing we're also doing is, now that we don't need to use the weapon swap for damage, because you know, we don't need to apply curses, we don't have to do any of that kind of stuff, we can use our weapon swap for 100% pure utility. So what we're doing now is kind of interesting, kind of like this setup is, so I'm running Blink right now in my weapon swap. I mean, and you can run Blink in your main weapon, your crossbow set. I'll go over a couple of different aura setups we can go. There's quite a few that you can choose from, but the one I kind of like is the Blink in the offhand, because then what we can do is we can use the Crest of Adura to get a lot of cooldown reduction, and then on our weapon swap we can actually spec into even more cooldown reduction and even some movement speed and this kind of stuff here. So what this allows us to do is, first of all, my Blink cooldown is, so right now I actually am trying out Second Wind, but without Second Wind, the Blink cooldown, you can see 1.33 second cooldown on Blink, which means it's pretty much always up. And since we actually do have a bit more movement speed in this setup, it means that, you know, you clear a breach or whatever, and then you go and loot. And while you're looting, you can have extra movement speed and a very, very low cooldown blink to actually reduce the looting time or the backtracking. Like, say you have to backtrack in a map, just swap over to this, you know, wand setup, and you're going to be all of a sudden moving faster, able to blink extremely quickly with low cooldown, and it makes that kind of like annoying backtracking or looting or clearing towers and all that kind of stuff quite a bit more enjoyable. Alright, so let's go do a tier 4 Xesht, and when I'm doing bosses, I actually do have 2 rings. Like before, so when I'm mapping, I'm using the porcelain ring, and when I go for a boss, I'll swap it over to a different weapon that has a little bit more damage on it, right? And in this setup, we are running on a 6 link, right? But I think what we do is we'll try one on a 5 link as well after this. So you can see damage actually pretty good. This is like no Hand of Wisdom in action. We're going to kill him before the hands come out, pretty much. Alright, oh, and we got the gloves. Perfect. Okay, so now let's try him on a 5 link, and actually in the last clip with the 6 link, I was actually using the wrong setups. I had close combat instead of martial tempo in the shock burst rounds, so that was kind of a mistake. So we could have been doing actually quite a bit more DPS, but I think what we do is we'll take out the primal armaments port, and so we'll be running this on a 5 link. Right, and we'll see how, you know, if we can actually take him down. Alright, so we can charge up the fresh clip, and let's see how high we can get the tooltip up with just a 5 link with our fresh clip. We'll probably close this about like 74k-ish on the top end. Okay, we gotta dodge the hand. Alright, that's a little bit unfortunate, but you can see we are still chunking this guy. We can do our emergency reload here. Hopefully get some damage out before the hands come out. Alright. Well, the hands did come out, but we actually killed them. So 5 link, Xesht T4, no Hand of Wisdom in action on a 5 link. Pretty insane, right? Alright, next let's check out some mapping on this build. We're still using the non-Hand of Wisdom in action setup. Only difference is for mapping, I like to use the porcelain ring because it makes the Herald Shatters quite a bit more consistent. And so we have blink, very low cooldown blink. We have the shatters, that's all working very well. And so I would like to have blink on the main hand weapon set, and I think you could do it. I guess I'll cover that later on, but yeah, defense wise, I think now I kind of changed the setup a little bit to have more energy shield. I guess also because now I have the rare body armor, so now about 2k ES, and then like 4k with Grim Feast, and then, you know, 1.5k life. And this setup actually feels really tanky, like when you have these kind of numbers, and very rarely dying actually, even in these kind of juiced maps with like breaches and that kind of stuff. And nice thing about the setup too is rare monsters are dying a lot faster than before. Like tough rare monsters, we're killing them off pretty quickly because of, first of all, the auto shock setup is applying very high shock, and then we also do have a cast on shock, which is going to be boosting our DPS by quite a bit. And then when we have to backtrack, we can easily just swap over to our blink setup, which is like very high mobility, low cooldown blink, which is pretty much always going to be up. I can just always just like blink around whenever I want, and then kill some mobs off, right? And this guy is a little bit tough. Let's kill him off. And then we can just go blink around to go to the next one, right? So mobility actually ends up being quite good, I think, even though we're not super invested in movement speed that much on this character. But yeah, let's go find the breach. We got a Whittle Hail. Nice. And there is a boss in this map as well. We'll go and kill him off. And where is the breach? Yeah, in this setup, the Galvanic Shards actually does feel like an actual shotgun right now. Because of, like, I guess with the cast on shock on rare monsters, we apply the critical weakness and voltaic mark very quickly. And that actually like really helps your galvanic shards DPS on rare monsters, right? And we are actually running a 5-link on our galvanic shards. Anyway, so here's the breach. Let's kind of give it a little bit of room to grow, I think, and then we'll go in and try to get some really nice shocks or, you know, explosions, maybe. Or we'll just go in and die, right? I have died on this character, right? It's not, wow, okay, that was really nice. This character, not immortal, obviously, but definitely does have enough tankiness to survive whatever, like, you know, hits you're going to be getting in these kind of, oops, okay, this is getting a little bit sketchy, guys. Let me pull back a little bit. I definitely can take the hits, right? Okay, why is this so slow? Alright, okay, that's kind of a little bit sketchy. But yeah. Holy shit. Alright, well, can be a little bit rough, right? But how big was that explosion? Like, everything's dead. Alright, okay, a little bit sketchy breach, guys, but you can see, you know, pretty good, right? I think we're kind of like getting in a bad spot. But anyways, definitely able to actually do these, and you can see my character actually leveling up now. And, you know, when it comes time to loot, you can just go swap over to this wand set, go around and get all the loot. And you can see the blink cooldown pretty much always up, right? Because we have really low cooldowns. So go get some loot here, go grab the exalted orbs. Oh, wait. Grab the exalted orbs, get the bows, and then go over and like loot really quickly, right? Okay, so let's go and kill the map boss. And hopefully the map boss is a little bit smoother than that breach, because that was a little bit sketchy. Alright, so now we go and test out the auto shock setup, and you can see we've already procced our shock on the boss. We'll just do our reload and kill him off. Alright, pretty easy. Alright, so let's go over the build, and most of the items are going to be kind of the same as the previous low budget weapon master setup. You can see we're actually using some of the same items, but we will go over them sort of in this video, the important stats on the item. So first of all, let's start off with the amulet, and how much damage do you actually need to get this to actually, you know, proc. And right now, I think what we need to do is, first of all, don't look at this DPS number, right? Because I think this is not really correct, because it is calculating DPS based on your cast time, which is irrelevant for this ability because we're not casting it. Instead, what we need to look at is the total damage over here, or the lightning damage. On my monk build, on the high-end setup, this was about what, 10 to 15k lightning damage. And now, even with, at the top end, 544, still able to very reliably proc these shocks. So I'd say you could even go down a little bit more, but maybe around 5k-ish tooltip on this lightning damage, and you should be fine to actually run this setup. I haven't really tested any setups doing less damage, but this is just what we're running right now on the low budget setup. And how do we actually get more damage on this thing? And since we don't really actually want to go and get spell damage, because it's not going to do anything for us, we can actually just get a few supports, like considered casting. Spell Echo is going to make it hit 2 times, so that means double chance to actually shock, pretty much, because it hits 2 times. And since we are also a crit build, this means that it has 2 chances to crit. And when it crits, it's going to be doing, right now the crit damage bonus 377% on the lightning bolt, so about 3.7 times X damage, right? So the way I'm scaling the damage high enough to make it shock is pretty much with crit, right? And you might think like 28% chance, not very high, but once we do get our, how do you say, winner stacks up, this crit chance is going to go all the way up to maybe 60-ish%, 50-60%. And then we're hitting 2 times with a spell echo, so it means our crit chance is actually relatively high with this ability. Okay, so also on the tree, we also do have a few generic lightning increases, like, you know, the coming calamity node down here. And you could also anoint pure power, which is going to give you increased lightning damage based on your int. Although it's not really as, you know, I've chose to anoint storm charged I guess this is also going to be benefiting the lightning bolts as well, because we just get basic, you know, generic crit chance and then elemental damage if we've crit recently. So overall, this is probably going to be the best one. But anyways, the way you're going to be scaling damage is pretty much with crit. Okay, so next we'll cover the weapon. So the weapon on this low budget setup is going to be a bit different. On the high budget setups using Hand of Wisdom and Action, we're going to be going for a elemental damage with attacks prefix, but since we don't really have that much flat, you know, I mean, yes, we do have some on the ring and a little bit on the gloves, but not enough to actually make the weapon elemental damage really, you know, a top priority, you could say, right? So I think rather getting a high actual DPS weapon with some good flat damage and then crit chance, crit damage bonus, attack speed is going to be good, and skipping the, you know, a weapon elemental damage roll on the prefix means your crossbow is going to be significantly cheaper, because you know, all the top end builds using Hand of Wisdom and Action want the weapon elemental damage roll, you know, so that really pushes up the price for those crossbows. But since we don't need it on this setup, on the low budget setup at least, right? On the higher budget setups, we will use that prefix, but low budget setups not as impactful, so you can skip it and get a cheaper crossbow. So I would say you probably want to stay around 400 DPS weapon. I would say 350, 400-ish DPS is what you want, and then focus on the crit damage bonus and attack speed. Okay, so let's cover the defense setup for this character, as it is okay, right? It's not perfect, but when you're on a budget, I'd say this setup does actually work out very good. We're basically just using the series sustain with a bit of evasion, and then having life on kill to cover the, you know, life loss we lose whenever we get hit, because some of the damage will go through our energy shield, and then having Grim Feast to recover our energy shield in combat, and then, you know, getting about 4k ES, 1.5k life means we have a pretty big life, you know, buffer while mapping. So ends up working out pretty good. I actually really like this setup, and even on the medium budget setup, I've kept it with this similar setup. I guess we'll go over why and when we cover that setup. But anyways, so helmet and series sustain, pretty much just want to try to get a high roll on the maximum life as extra maximum energy shield. Other good rolls would be if you could get spirit corruption on the helmet. It probably will help you out, because we are going to have to get at least 50 spirit from somewhere to run all of these. Well, actually, you don't. I mean, there is an ultra budget setup you could do that doesn't have any spirit, but that means you just can't run the cast on shock, pretty much. And you will, and which is actually not that bad, right? We'll go over that in the gems, but you just manually cast the Eye of Winter. Okay, so after that, we'll take a look at the body armor, and I think the Scalper's Jacket gonna be pretty good because it has the 5% increased movement speed. So the base evasion energy shield you get on this is a little bit lower, but it does have that 5% movement speed, and so I think this one's pretty nice. And then at least 50 spirit, right? Because we're gonna be running double heralds, Grim Feast, cast on shock, or you run blink. So either one, and that means 150. If you can get up to 160, it's actually even better, because then you can run precision. And yeah, this build isn't even accuracy capped, well, at least in PoE. I mean, we're pretty close, we're like 2% off. But anyways, running precision is going to help you quite a bit on your gear. Otherwise, you might have to get, like, see, I have some accuracy on my rings, I have some accuracy on my crossbow. And if you don't have precision, that means you actually have to get a little bit on your gear, or on the passive tree, go pick up some accuracy. So I'm actually using 1 point here to get some accuracy. And if I wasn't using this, I could actually spec into a bit more damage. Okay, so that's that. And then after that, the rings are your typical, you know, attack rings. Try to get flat lightning damage or increased lightning damage, whichever one. The flat's probably better. If you can get cold damage, even better, because it will help your heralds out quite a bit. And basically for the other ring, using the porcelain ring, because it's going to produce like the best clear pretty much, you know, when you don't have a lot of damage for the Herald of Thunder chaining. It's going to make it very reliable, and you're going to be getting these big screen-wide explosions from the Herald chaining. Okay, so, and I do recommend on this setup is that you try to only cap your cold resistance with this ring, right? So don't rely on this ring slot to actually cap something like your fire resistance, right? Because that means I can easily swap over rings, because my damage ring for like when I'm doing a tier 4 Xesht or a boss has this exact same stats, right? It has a little bit of strength and a bit of cold resistance, right? So I can easily swap over rings, and my resistances are going to be totally fine as well as my stats. Okay, so that is that for the rings. For the gloves, pretty much you can go for evasion pair of gloves or evasion energy shield or even armor evasion if that's cheap. But we just want to get attack speed and then dex because we are going to need quite a bit of attributes. And this is actually quite a bit of, a little bit hard on this lower budget setup to get, but it is definitely possible. So we need to get attributes, attack speed, and then flat damage, lightning damage, cold damage, physical damage, and then resistances. Belt, same kind of thing here. It's just going to be getting your attributes, getting your, resistances and that kind of stuff. Maybe even get life if you can. And boots, the same kind of thing. Pretty much resistances, attributes, movement speed, and that kind of stuff. So that is the gear. Pretty simple gear, I would say. Okay, so let's go over the skill gems on shock burst rounds. Your kind of standard setup here, we have the fresh clip, concentrated effect, elemental focus, martial tempo, and primal armament. And if you're on a 5 link, what you do is you take out the primal armament, and the primal armament will go into the galvanic shards, and you replace the close combat. So it'll look like this. And then for galvanic shards, it's just lightning infusion for nimble reload and close combat. So this setup over here, and then Herald Thunder is our, your standard clear chaining setup. And so right now I have only about 1,100 cold damage on Herald Thunder, and you could see the Herald chains are very consistent. And basically it's all just cold infusion, pretty much. If I take out cold infusion, I have only about 215. That's probably because I have a little bit on my weapon. But anyways, and then we have glaciation, ice bite, and inevitable critical. This is one not super important. You could put something else here. And then Herald of Ice, innervate, long shot, magnified effect, and persistence. And the reason we put persistence in Herald of Ice is so that when the innervate procs, instead of 3 seconds, it's like 5 seconds. So the buff lasts a bit longer. And one thing I'm doing here is, so I was kind of curious to see if the amulet would proc on a map with reduced monsters have like 170% reduced or increased ailment threshold. Okay, so here is the boss with the map. You could see over here it has 161% increased ailment threshold. And we're going to see if we can actually proc the amulet. And it was actually a bit hard. But I think even if you had a normal shock setup, it would be kind of hard. You see, I'm actually hitting him quite a few times and I'm not getting the amulet. Or the amulet is proccing, but it's not actually proccing shock. So this might actually be a little bit of a problem, and what we ended up doing is, so that's kind of why I have this thing here. So if that ever happens, I guess you can just turn off your Herald of Thunder and then turn on the overwhelming presence. But honestly, this only happened in those kind of maps, right, with ailment threshold. So, and this issue is kind of fixed once you do get better gear and more damage, so I don't think it's that big of a problem. But anyways, that's kind of why we have overwhelming presence. We turn on the overwhelming presence and you can see all of a sudden we're going to be able to shock the boss and get in our DPS. Okay, so let's go over some of the aura setups, I guess. And first of all, this is the one I'm running here. We have on weapon 1, I have Herald of Thunder, Herald of Ice, and Cast on Shock and Grim Feast, right? And then on weapon 2, I'm running Blink and then whatever else, like Grim Feast. And with this setup here means that you get your Cast on Shock. Your Cast on Shock is always active, so that means in maps, if there's a hard rare boss, or rare monster or something, you can use your Cast on Shock. So also kind of like a lazy man setup, right? Because you don't have to, cast push any other buttons or anything. The only downside is that your Blink is going to be on your off weapon, so it might make it a little bit annoying to use, but I'm kind of used to it. You just push swap weapon and then push dodge and you blink. So I'm kind of used to that, and the benefit of this setup is that we can invest in blink, cooldown reduction, and get a very low cooldown blink. Okay, another option is this is basically going to be faster access to blink. So basically we're just swapping in blink for Cast on Shock. So we remove Cast on Shock, we put blink in weapon set 1, and we just ignore weapon set 2. We don't do weapon set 2. We don't do any of these passive tree weapon swap sets. Everything's on weapon set 1, or just remove all the green stuff pretty much. And when we do that setup, basically what you do is, I guess we'll take a look here. We put Eye of Winter in. So we get our Eye of Winter, and then we put Unleash, right? And then Unleash is going to make it repeat 2 times. So we cast our Eye of Winter, and I guess you can put the Arcane Tempo in here so it casts faster, but basically one cast of this is going to be instant 10 stacks of critical weakness. Right, so you basically don't really need to cast on Shock, you just kind of miss out on the Voltaic Mark, and you do have to push one extra button. But the upside is you're always going to be running blink on your main weapon, so it means you can dodge abilities quite a bit faster, and makes might make gameplay a little bit easier. And also the other upside is your critical weakness stacks are going to be up 100% at the start of the fight, so that might make it easier to actually apply your shocks from the greater lightning bolt, because the target already has all those critical weakness stacks. Okay, so that is another setup you guys could run. And another option, this is the ultra budget option. So say you cannot get any extra spirit on your body armor, right? And in that situation, what you do is you run Herald of Thunder, Herald of Ice, Grim Feast, right? That's pretty much it. On weapon set 1, and on weapon set 2, you run Blink and Grim Feast. And then you also do the exact same thing with the Eye of Winter, so you manually cast your Eye of Winter, right? So even if you can't get Spirit on your body armor, you can actually still run this entire setup. You just have to follow the option 3 for the auras. Next, we'll go over the passive tree and doing something a little bit different. And the main difference is that I cut out all of this attribute stuff, because on this setup, even though this is going to make getting attributes a lot easier, if we cut all of this stuff out, it means we can actually go and get a lot more crit, a lot more evasion, energy shield, movement speed, skill speed, crit, like a bunch of crit. Like this whole area in PoE is like, if we cut this whole area out, which we would probably have to do if you want to go get all the attribute stuff and this attack speed and what have you, right? This is like 30 or 40% of our damage, right? All of these nodes, just that good, right? So basically we come down over here and then we grab some of the crit, and the idea here is like, you don't really have to follow this tree 100%. I'll just tell you what we're trying to do, so you can actually go, modify the tree to how you like it, and basically trying to get all the crit. That's pretty much it. We just get all the crit nodes. There's one here, one here. This node here, pretty value too, so we're going to be taking that. We get the attack speed from Dex, because we still do get, quite a big benefit from that. And then we just get all the crit, and the only, big, like, high value damage, lightning damage node down here, the Wildstorm. And then after that, we just get the crit, we get some defense, and then we get more crit and defense. So that's pretty much it. All we're looking for is crit, then evasion and energy shield, and that's pretty much it. Okay, and then as for the weapon swaps, so the green set is going to be the shield. If you're going to be running the blink in the offhand set, what we're doing is I just got a wand with as much cast speed as possible, because to make the blink cast faster, and then using the Crest of Adura, because this has cooldown recovery rate, so it's going to make our blink come off cooldown quite a bit faster. And then with the passive tree here, we're just going into this cooldown recovery over here, more cooldown recovery here, and then the weapon swap speed. So there's a bit more cooldown here. And then the last points are spent on just movement speed. So the nice thing is, going to the wand is going to be a little bit slow, but because we have the weapon swap speed here, going from the wand back to your crossbow is going to be quite a bit faster, or it should be. Okay, so that's that. As for the Ascendancy, there's only 2 options here: Decimating Strike, Calling Strike, No Mercy, and Witchbane. I suppose you could remove this and maybe even go Sorcery Ward, but like, I'm not even running that much evasion, right? So I suppose you could spec more into evasion. That's like the nice thing about this build is you can customize it to either have more evasion, have more energy shield, have more damage. Right now I'm running a little bit more on the more damage approach, because I think that is the better way to solve defense as well. You get just enough evasion, about 50%, then you get enough max hit to survive a couple of big hits, and then you put everything else into damage, and if there's no monsters left on the screen, they can't do damage to you, right? Alright, so let's go over the medium budget version. And now in Mobalytics, we have these different tabs you can check out, and previously on the Weapon Master one, the medium budget version was actually going into a CI pure energy shield build. And I think now it's probably going to be better to stick to the Adziri's Disdain setup on the medium budget as well, because, okay, first of all, if you go to a CI ES build, like, that is probably the best setup, but it's quite expensive. And if you don't get enough energy shield and evasion, it's going to feel bad, because you're just going to die, right? So And one other thing is, like, when you're swapping over from this low budget setup to the medium budget setup, you don't want to have to replace all of your gear to get like the, you know, the 400 and 500 ES helmet and like an ES pair of boots. So in this way, it's a lot easier to just buy Hand of Wisdom in Action and then just put it on. You buy the Ingenuity and Ingenuity rings and you just put it on and you just start using it like that, right? So I think as a, you know, upgrade path, this did make more sense. And then once you actually get your, you know, your Ingenuity and you get your Hand of Wisdom in Action, you get some nice rings and you get a nice crossbow, you can actually, you know, instead of spending your currency buying new helmets and new boots, you can actually just spend it on these other items that are going to give you a bit more benefit, I think. So I think this medium budget setup, we stick to the Azirius Desane setup because, you know, this setup is actually, you know, very, very good defense-wise as well. Okay, so let's go take a look in POB. Now, one of the main things is on the weapon is we do want to change our weapon, I guess if possible, right? And you know, if you're going to be making a character, guys, like this character, what I recommend you do is, first of all, you download POB, and then you recreate your character using my config, like, because my config has a lot of things here that are going to simulate the actual DPS of your abilities. Because POB doesn't have a lot of things, like it doesn't have the Eye of Winter. We have the average of the Decimating Strike and Concentration, which is going to be about 30% on average. How much, yeah, sometimes it might be more, might be less sometimes, but on average, those two combined are going to be about 30% more damage. And then also there are some bug nodes on the passive tree, like the Coming Calamity doesn't actually give you any DPS when you spec into it, so you have to add that here. And then we have the bonus from Fresh Clip, like we mentioned, it's always up pretty much, right? Because we're able to ramp up our Fresh Clip without interrupting it with any kind of weapon swap or whatever. And then most importantly, the Amulet mod, which is going to simulate our lightning damage, ignoring and monster and elemental resistances. Okay, so basically just use this POB, get this POB, and then what you do is you come into the items, you go into PoE, and then you just Control C, and let's just say we just Control C, copy the helmet, and then Control V, paste it into POB, and now the helmet's here, and we can just swap everything. So basically recreate your character here in POB, and then when you're looking for a crossbow on trade, then you can go on the trade site and you just go like this, just copy the whole thing. Push Control C, we go to items once again, and there we go. And you might have to fix some things here, like you can add the soul cores, we'll put the crit damage soul cores. And now we can actually see that, well, this weapon that is 3 divines is a 3% DPS increase, right? And we can just add it to the build. And we can go take a look and see if this item is actually even worth buying. And also, you know, when you buy a new pair of boots or whatever, you can see, oh, how much resistances do I need and all this kind of stuff. So definitely start using POB, make your character, and then it'll help you plan out your upgrades. And most importantly, not waste divines, right? Because, you know, you might buy a crossbow that looks good, but you put it on, it's actually a DPS loss, right? So I don't want that to happen. So the main difference from on the medium budget version is that we're going to be using the Hand of Wisdom in Action and Ingenuity. In order of upgrades, you should be buying the Hand of Wisdom in Action and then buying the Ingenuity. And this one I think is like a 70%, right? It's like 60-70%, and then getting good rings. Pretty much what you want on the rings is going to be the same thing: the flat lightning damage, increased lightning damage, maybe some stats if you can. And then most importantly, I like to have a roll of all elemental resistances on the ring, and maybe even one other resistance, right? So we can take care of our resistances with one ring, and then what we can do is on the second ring we can have it set up so that it's swappable to a porcelain ring, right? So you see this one here is just cold resistance, right? So that'll match the cold resistance on the porcelain ring, right? So you kind of have to play around with this, but if you have enough damage, this one is not that important. As far as the rest of the items, they're pretty much all the same, except, you know, the crossbow is more focused for a Hand of Wisdom in Action build with the increased elemental damage with attacks. And I think everything else is the same. The passive tree does change a little bit because we do want to go and now pick up the attributes. So we pick up the attributes. We did have to cut out a little bit of stuff over here, and we're no longer going all the way up to pure power. This is quite a big DPS increase. Like, it's like 10% more DPS, but storm charged just a little bit better, right? So that's kind of what we're doing. I suppose you could get Anoint Pure Power if you have more int, because at some point, once you get enough int, this Pure Power is probably going to be a bit more DPS. Okay, aside from that, everything else is pretty much the same. You know, we're doing a few more things with our, we can actually go pick up a little bit more cooldown recovery over here. That's quite nice. As far as the weapon swaps and all that kind of stuff, it's exactly the same as, how would you say, the low budget version. Okay, so let's take a look at the high budget version, and the main differences here is that we are now going to be playing a pure CI evasion build. So we do have the CI, the energy shield, boots, helmet, and have a new body armor with some very nice stats on it. The crossbow we have also here is a very nice crossbow with some very nice crit damage bonus, attack speed, and you know, pretty good flat and increased elemental damage with attacks. Okay, and if we look into PoE, we were actually able to get all the way up to 20 million DPS with the exact same config that, you know, all the other builds are using. And just keep in mind, guys, the previous Weapon Master build was barely pushing 10 million DPS. So this is pretty much double the damage of what the previous builds were doing. Also, like the actual DPS wise and also gameplay wise, boss kill time quite a bit faster with the AUTOSHOCK setup. Okay, so let's take a look at the passive tree. You can see a little bit similar to the previous build, still going around the world, and I don't know, you could customize it a bit. I think the choice is going to be either do you go all the way up here for all of this stuff here, right? You can see this is about 23% DPS increase. Also, the energy shield you get from what do you call it, patient barrier, is quite substantial, or you come down this way. Because it's pretty similar in terms of DPS, but like the upside is you get more evasion and less energy shield. Okay, so on this setup, let's go over some of the items. Basically, the crossbow is just a better crossbow than before, with the same kind of stat priority. The helmet is going to be a like 450 plus energy shield helmet with critical hit chance, intelligence, and then some resistance. For the body armor, we're going to be getting at least 50 spirit, high evasion, energy shield, and then dex, int, and then some resistance. And then for the boots, it's going to be the same kind of thing. Rarity if you can, and then intelligence, cold resistance. Try to get a good corruption on your Choir of the Storm. And then for the breach rings, we're going to be having flat damage, lightning damage, and then increased lightning damage, and rarity if you can, and then some intelligence or dex or whatever, and then some resistances and this kind of stuff. Okay, so that's pretty much it. As for the jewels, they're just ES, crit damage, crit chance, elemental damage, or shock magnitude. Either one is fine. For the Against the Darkness, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be getting spirit and damages extra lightning. This is actually a lot better than getting intelligence. Okay, so and then we just get all these notes here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this actually helps us get all the spirit we need, right? We can have 220 spirit right now in the setup, and probably even get more if you get the From Nothing for Iron Reflexes. You get these two notes here. Basically with this setup, what we can do is now we can run all of our auras on weapon set 1. So we can have Blink, Grim Feast, Herald of Thunder, Herald of Ice, and Cast on Shock, all of that on weapon set 1, so we don't have to swap back to weapon set 2 to blink around, right? So even more quality of life on this top end setup when we're able to actually get the Against the Darkness for this extra spirit. Aside from that, everything else, the priorities of the tree are the same. Pick up the crit, pick up the evasion, pick up the energy shield, and that's it. Alright guys, so that's going to be it for this video. Yeah, definitely try out the AUTOSHOCK setup because it is completely a game changer, and now that I've actually been playing with this AUTOSHOCK setup, I just can't go back. If I play a crossbow build that's using shock burst rounds and it doesn't have this AUTOSHOCK setup, I'm just not going to play it because it's just that good, right? Anyways, try it out guys, it's pretty fun, and yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.